A billionaire's credit card gets declined in front of a laughing crowd. Everyone is recording, mocking, enjoying his humiliation. But then, a little girl in a worn yellow shirt steps forward. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out 3 crumpled dollar bills. Everything she has in the world. And what she does next will silence that entire store and change this man's life forever. If you believe that one small act of kindness can change everything, stay with me. Because what happens in the next few minutes will restore your faith in humanity. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at wealth the same way again. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know, sometimes life has a funny way of teaching us lessons when we least expect it. And this story, well, it's about one of those moments. A moment that happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a small grocery store in Portland, Maine. The kind of moment that changes everything. Picture this with me. It's a regular day at Murphy's Grocery, nothing special. The fluorescent lights are humming overhead, shopping carts are squeaking down the aisles, and people are going about their business. Some are picking up milk and bread after work. Others are grabbing ingredients for dinner. It's the kind of scene you've probably seen 1,000 times in your own life. At the checkout counter, there's a line forming. People are tired from their day, maybe a little impatient, just wanting to get home. And that's when he walks up. A man in an expensive gray suit, the kind that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent. His shoes are polished to a mirror shine. His watch catches the light as he places his items on the conveyor belt. Everything about him screams success, money, power. His name is Daniel Westbrook. Though nobody in that store knows it, he's one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast. He built an empire in real estate and construction. His company's name is on buildings in Boston, in New York, in cities across the country. He's the kind of man who's used to people saying yes, used to doors opening before he even reaches them, used to respect that comes automatically with money. But here, in this small grocery store in Portland, none of that matters. The cashier, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a name tag that says Beth, scans his items. Organic vegetables, expensive cuts of meat, imported cheese, things that tell a story of a life lived comfortably. The total comes to $147.63. Daniel reaches into his wallet without a second thought and pulls out a sleek black credit card. The kind that has no limit, the kind that most people only dream about. He hands it to Beth. She swipes it once. The machine beeps. She frowns slightly and swipes it again. Another beep. And then, on the small screen that faces the customer, a word appears in red letters, declined. For a second, everything freezes. Daniel stares at the screen, confused. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. He asks Beth to try again. She does, but her expression has already changed. There's a hint of amusement in her eyes now, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Declined again, sir, she says, and this time her voice is just loud enough that the people behind him can hear. The word spreads like fire in dry grass. Declined. The man in the expensive suit, his card was declined. People lean forward to see better. Someone snickers. Then someone else. And then Beth, the cashier, she throws her head back and laughs. Not a polite chuckle, but a real, loud laugh that echoes through the store. Guess that fancy suit doesn't mean much, does it? She says, loud enough for everyone to hear. And just like that, the floodgates open. People are laughing now, pointing, whispering behind their hands. Some are taking out their phones, probably thinking about posting this on social media. A rich man brought down to their level, humiliated in the most public way possible. It's like they're enjoying seeing someone who seemed so far above them suddenly crash down to earth. Daniel feels his face burning. His throat is tight. In all his years, in all his success, he's never felt anything quite like this. Shame. Pure, crushing shame. He tries to speak, to explain, but the words won't come. His hands are shaking as he reaches for the card, as if trying again will somehow make this nightmare end. But it's not going to end. Not yet. Because standing right next to him, barely reaching his waist, is a little girl. She's maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a faded yellow t-shirt with a cartoon character on it that's cracked and peeling from too many washes. Her jeans have a patch on one knee. Her sneakers have seen better days. Her dark hair is pulled back in 2 ponytails that are a little uneven, like maybe she did them herself that morning. She's been standing there quietly, waiting with her grandmother who's behind Daniel in line. But now, she's watching everything unfold. She sees the man's face turning red. She sees his hands shaking. She sees the way people are laughing at him, the way they're enjoying his pain. And she doesn't understand it. To this little girl, whose name is Emma, the world is still simple. When someone is hurt, you help them. When someone is sad, you try to make them smile. When someone needs something and you have it, you share. These aren't complicated rules. They're just what you do. It's what her grandmother taught her, what her mother would have taught her if she were still alive. Emma watches Daniel, and she doesn't see a rich man or a poor man. She doesn't see someone who deserves to be laughed at. She sees someone who needs help. And even though she's just a child, even though she barely understands what's happening, she feels something stirring in her chest. Something that tells her she needs to do something. The laughter continues. Daniel stands there, frozen in his humiliation. And Emma, this little girl in her worn yellow shirt, reaches into the small pocket of her jeans. What happens next? Well, that's going to change everything. Not just for Daniel. Not just for Emma. But for everyone watching. Sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest hearts. And sometimes, it takes a child to show us what we've forgotten about being human. Let me tell you what Emma pulled out of that pocket. It wasn't much. $3 in bills, crumpled and soft from being folded and unfolded many times. And some coins, maybe another dollar in change. This was everything she had. Her grandmother had given her $5 that morning for helping clean the house all week. Emma had been saving it, dreaming about maybe buying a small toy or some candy. But now, standing in that grocery store, watching this stranger suffer while everyone laughed, Emma made a decision. Her small hand closed around the money, and she stepped forward. Her heart was pounding. She was scared. All these adults were around her, and she was just a little girl. But she'd made up her mind. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the murmuring and laughter. Nobody heard her. So she tried again, a little louder this time. "Excuse me, please." Beth, the cashier, looked down, surprised to see this small child standing at the counter. The laughter started to fade as people noticed Emma too. With hands that trembled just slightly, Emma placed her crumpled bills and coins on the counter. The money made a small clinking sound as the coins scattered. In that big store with all those adults and all that noise, it seemed like such a tiny thing. But somehow in that moment, it was the loudest sound in the world. "I want to help pay," Emma said, her voice clear now despite her nervousness. "Please take this for the man's food." The store went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone stared at this little girl, at the small pile of money on the counter, at the scene unfolding before them. The laughter died on their lips. The smirks faded from their faces. Suddenly, the phones that had been out to record this man's humiliation were being tucked away. Beth, the cashier who had been laughing so loudly just moments before, now looked confused. Her smile disappeared. She glanced from the money to Emma, to Daniel, and back to Emma again. "Sweetheart, this is only about $4, she said, but her voice had changed. The mockery was gone. "I know," Emma said simply. "But it's all I have. Maybe it helps a little bit." Daniel had been standing there, frozen in his shame, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. But now he looked down. Really looked down, for maybe the first time in years. At this child who had nothing, who was offering everything. His eyes met hers. Emma's eyes were big and brown and filled with such genuine concern that Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. This little girl, who could have walked past, who could have laughed along with everyone else, who had every reason to keep her precious money for herself, was giving it away. For him. A complete stranger. "I." Daniel's voice caught in his throat. He had given speeches to thousands of people. He had negotiated deals worth millions of dollars. He had commanded rooms full of powerful men. But now, trying to thank this child, he couldn't find the words. Tears, actual tears, began to blur his vision. When was the last time he had cried? He couldn't even remember. But now, in this grocery store, in front of all these people, Daniel Westbrook felt tears running down his cheeks. He knelt down slowly, his expensive suit pants pressing against the dirty grocery store floor, until he was at Emma's level. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking, "you don't have to do this. This is your money. But you need help," Emma said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "My grandma says when someone needs help and you can give it, you should. Even if it's hard. Even if it's all you have." Behind Emma, her grandmother stood with her own eyes glistening with tears. She was a woman who had worked hard all her life, raised her grandchildren after her daughter passed away, knew what it meant to struggle and to give anyway. She hadn't stopped Emma because she understood. Some lessons are more valuable than money. Daniel looked around the store. The people who had been laughing minutes ago now looked ashamed. Some were staring at their shoes. Others had their hands over their mouths, perhaps realizing how cruel they had been. A woman in line was openly crying. A man who had been recording on his phone had put it away and was wiping his eyes. Emma's simple act of kindness had done something that no amount of yelling or preaching could have done. It had shown everyone in that store, in the clearest way possible, what they had become. How easily they had chosen mockery over compassion. How quickly they had turned someone's pain into entertainment. "I can't take your money," Daniel said softly to Emma, his hand gently closing over her small one. "But what you've given me is worth more than you could ever know." He stood up, took out his wallet, and pulled out several bills. He handed them to Beth, who took them with shaking hands, no longer laughing, no longer smirking. "This is for my groceries," he said. Then he pulled out more bills and handed them to Emma. "And this is for you. Not because I'm paying you back, but because someone as kind as you deserves kindness in return." Emma tried to refuse, but her grandmother nodded that it was okay to accept. Daniel then turned to address the whole store. His voice, usually so confident and commanding, was humble now, broken open in the best way possible. "This child," he said, his voice carrying through the silent store, "has just taught me something I should have learned a long time ago. Something I forgot while I was busy building my empire and counting my money." He paused, wiping his eyes. "She taught me what really matters. You know, there are moments in life that divide everything into before and after." For Daniel Westbrook, this was one of those moments. As he left Murphy's grocery that day, his expensive groceries in bags that suddenly felt meaningless, he couldn't stop thinking about Emma. He watched as she walked out of the store holding her grandmother's hand, counting the money he'd given her with wide, amazed eyes. She kept looking up at her grandmother, whispering excitedly, probably planning all the things she could do with it. And something inside Daniel wouldn't let him just walk away. Not this time. Not anymore. "Excuse me," he called out, jogging to catch up with them in the parking lot. The grandmother turned, protective instinct making her pull Emma a little closer. But when she saw it was Daniel, her expression softened. "I'm sorry to bother you," Daniel said, and he meant it. I wanted to properly thank you both. Your granddaughter did something today that I'll never forget." The grandmother smiled, a weary but warm smile. "She's got a good heart, my Emma. Too good for this world sometimes, I worry." "The world needs more hearts like hers," Daniel said. He hesitated, then continued. "Would it be all right if I walked with you? Just for a bit? I'd like to talk, if that's okay." The grandmother studied him for a moment. She'd lived long enough to read people, to sense when someone was being genuine. Whatever she saw in Daniel's face must have passed her test because she nodded. "We're heading home. It's about 6 blocks from here. You're welcome to walk along if you don't mind the distance." "I don't mind at all," Daniel said, meaning it completely. When was the last time he'd walked 6 blocks anywhere? He couldn't remember. He lived a life of town cars and private drivers, of elevators that took him straight to executive floors, of shortcuts and convenience. As they walked, Emma chattered happily, telling Daniel about her school, about her friends, about the stray cat that sometimes visited their backyard. She talked like children do, jumping from topic to topic, finding wonder in the smallest things. Daniel found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. Maybe years. The neighborhood changed as they walked. The neat storefronts gave way to older buildings. The trees were beautiful, but the sidewalks were cracked. Houses had peeling paint and sagging porches, but also flower boxes in windows and wind chimes on doorsteps. This was a neighborhood where people didn't have much, but they had each other. Emma's house was small. The white paint was faded and chipping in places. The porch steps creaked when they climbed them. But there were potted plants by the door, lovingly tended. A worn welcome mat. A home that was cared for, even if money was tight. "Would you like to come in for some tea?" the grandmother asked. It's the least we can offer after Emma's little adventure today. Daniel, who was used to champagne in penthouse offices, found himself saying yes to tea in this small house. And when he stepped inside, he saw a life he'd forgotten existed. The furniture was old but clean. There were drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, probably Emma's artwork. A small television in the corner, homework spread out on the kitchen table, the smell of something simple cooking on the stove. The grandmother introduced herself as Patricia. She made tea in mismatched mugs and served it with cookies that were store-brand but offered with genuine hospitality. Emma sat at the table, still clutching the money Daniel had given her, planning out loud what she would do with it. "I could buy new crayons," she said. "Mine are so short now. Or maybe I could get that book I wanted. Or," she looked at her grandmother. "Grandma, we could get that medicine for your knee. The one the doctor said would help but we couldn't afford." Patricia's eyes grew shiny. "Oh, honey, you don't need to worry about that." "But I could help now," Emma insisted. "That's what we do, right? We help each other." Daniel felt his throat tighten again. Here was this child given a gift, and her first thought was how to help her grandmother. How long had it been since Daniel thought about helping anyone but himself? How many years had he spent focused only on deals, on profits, on building his empire higher and higher, while forgetting the people on the ground? Patricia told him their story. How Emma's mother, her daughter, had passed away 2 years ago from an illness they couldn't afford to treat properly. How she'd taken in Emma and her younger brother, doing her best on her retirement money and part-time work at a local diner. How they struggled to make ends meet, but they had love, and they had each other, and somehow that was enough. "Emma's always been like this," Patricia said, watching her granddaughter with obvious love. "Even when her mama was sick, even when we had nothing, she'd find ways to share. She'd give half her school lunch to a kid who forgot theirs. She'd use her birthday money to buy a card for someone who was sad. I don't know where she gets it from, this giant heart in such a small body." Daniel listened, and with every word, he felt smaller and smaller. Not in a bad way, but in the way you feel when you realize how big your ego has been, how much space you've been taking up with things that don't matter. Here was this family with so little, and they had something he'd lost somewhere along the way. Grace. Generosity. Humanity. That night, Daniel went back to his luxury hotel in downtown Portland. He'd been there for a business deal, another property to acquire, another building to add to his collection. But lying in his king-size bed with its 1,000-thread-count sheets, all he could think about was Emma's small hand holding out those crumpled bills. He didn't sleep much that night. And when morning came, Daniel Westbrook had made a decision that would change the course of his life. Sometimes change happens slowly, like a river carving through stone over centuries. But sometimes change happens in an instant, like lightning striking and illuminating everything you've been doing wrong. For Daniel, it was lightning. The morning after meeting Emma, he canceled his business meetings. His assistant was shocked. Daniel Westbrook didn't cancel meetings. He didn't change plans. But Daniel wasn't the same man who had walked into that grocery store yesterday. That man had been knocked down, broken open, and rebuilt by a child's kindness. He spent that morning making phone calls. To his lawyers, to his accountants, to his business partners. They all thought he'd lost his mind when he told them what he wanted to do. Maybe he had. Or maybe he'd finally found it. Within a week, Daniel had established something new. The Emma Foundation, he called it, though he made sure to get Patricia's permission first. Its mission was simple: to help families who were struggling, who were one emergency away from disaster, who worked hard but still couldn't make ends meet. But Daniel did something different from other wealthy people who started charities. He didn't just write checks and attend fancy fundraising dinners. He got his hands dirty. He showed up. The first place he went was back to Murphy's Grocery. He walked in wearing jeans and a simple shirt, not his usual expensive suit. He found Beth, the cashier who had laughed at him, who had mocked him in his moment of humiliation. She looked terrified when she saw him, probably thinking he was there for revenge or to get her fired. Instead, Daniel did something she never expected. He apologized. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he told her, standing at her register while she gaped at him. "I've spent so many years looking down on people, thinking my money made me better than others. That day when you laughed at me, it hurt. But I deserved it, because I've made plenty of people feel that small with my attitude, my arrogance. So I'm sorry, and I'm trying to do better." Beth didn't know what to say. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry too," she whispered. "What I did was cruel. And watching that little girl show kindness when I'd shown none, it's haunted me every day since." Daniel smiled. "Then we've both learned something, haven't we? That's what makes it worth it." He left an envelope with Beth before he went. Inside was enough money to cover her rent for 6 months and a note that said, "For when your card gets declined. We all need help sometimes." From there, Daniel started showing up at places he'd never been before. Food banks, community centers, homeless shelters. He didn't announce who he was or make a big show of it. He just came, listened to people's stories, and asked what they needed. He met a single father working 3 jobs and still unable to afford his daughter's asthma medicine. Daniel paid for it. And then he paid for a year's worth of it. And then he made sure the man got a better job with healthcare through one of his own companies. He met an elderly couple about to lose their home to foreclosure. The house where they'd raised their children, where they'd built a lifetime of memories. Daniel bought the mortgage and forgave the debt. The couple wept in his arms, and Daniel wept too, because he was learning that tears weren't weakness. They were proof you still had a heart that could feel. He met teenagers who wanted to go to college but couldn't afford it. Veterans who served their country and came home to nothing. Families choosing between paying for groceries or paying for heat. Every story broke his heart a little more and rebuilt it a little stronger. Emma became a big part of the foundation, not as a symbol, but as a guide. Daniel made sure that she and Patricia never wanted for anything again. He paid off their house. He set up college funds for Emma and her brother. He made sure Patricia had the best medical care for her knee and anything else she needed. But more than the money, he gave them his time. He showed up for Emma's school plays and her brother's baseball games. He came for Sunday dinners in that small house with the chipped paint. Patricia became like a mother to him, teaching him things his own privileged upbringing never had. How to make soup from leftovers. How to mend clothes instead of throwing them away. How to find joy in simple things. Emma taught him too, though she never knew she was teaching. She taught him how to see people. Really see them. Not as transactions or statistics or obstacles, but as human beings with dreams and struggles and dignity. One day, about 6 months after that moment in the grocery store, Daniel was at a community center helping serve lunch to families in need. A woman came through the line, tired from work, gratefully accepting the hot meal. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and said, "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to us." And Daniel realized something. This was what had been missing from his life all along. Not money, he'd always had plenty of that. But purpose. Connection. The chance to be part of something bigger than himself. The opportunity to look someone in the eye and know that he'd made their day a little bit easier, their burden a little bit lighter. He thought about the man he used to be. The one who measured success in dollars and buildings and power. That man seemed like a stranger now. Someone he used to know, but didn't particularly like. The man he was becoming, the one Emma's kindness had revealed, was someone he could be proud of. Not because of what he owned, but because of what he gave. Not because of how much money he had, but because of how much love he was learning to share. 2 years passed. The Emma Foundation grew bigger than Daniel ever imagined. But it stayed true to its roots, focused not on publicity or recognition, but on genuine help for people who needed it. News eventually spread about what Daniel was doing. Reporters wanted interviews. Other wealthy people started asking questions, wondering why a billionaire was spending his days in soup kitchens and community centers instead of boardrooms and golf courses. One reporter finally got Daniel to agree to an interview. She came expecting to find a man looking for praise or tax breaks or good publicity. Instead, she found Daniel volunteering at a home repair project, hammer in hand, sweat on his brow, laughing with the family whose house they were fixing. "Why do you do this?" she asked him. "You could pay people to do this work. Why get your own hands dirty?" Daniel paused, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. He thought about how to answer, and then he told her about Emma. About the grocery store, about the declined card, about the 3 crumpled dollars and handful of change. About the moment a child's kindness had shattered his world and rebuilt it into something better. "I do this," he said, "because a little girl taught me that wealth isn't what you have in your bank account. It's what you have in your heart. And she had more wealth in her small hands than I had in all my buildings and businesses combined." The interview went viral. Not because of scandal or controversy, but because it touched something deep in people. In a world that often felt cold and cruel, here was a story of transformation, of humility, of hope. Other wealthy people started their own foundations. But Daniel warned them, gently, that writing checks wasn't enough. You have to show up, he'd tell them. You have to look people in the eyes, learn their names, hear their stories. You have to remember that behind every statistic is a person. A real person with dreams and fears and dignity. On the 2-year anniversary of that day in the grocery store, Daniel organized a celebration. Not for himself, but for all the people who had been helped by the foundation. Hundreds came. The single father whose daughter could now breathe easily. The elderly couple still living in their home. the teenagers now in college. Beth, the cashier, who had become a volunteer coordinator for the foundation, her shame transformed into purpose. And of course, Emma and Patricia. Emma was 9 now, still wearing her hair in ponytails, still seeing the world with those same kind eyes. She'd grown, but her heart had stayed just as big. She spent her allowance on others, volunteered at the animal shelter, tutored younger kids at school. She was still just being Emma, not knowing that she'd changed the world by changing one man. During the celebration, Daniel asked if he could say a few words. The room grew quiet as he stood up, Emma sitting in the front row next to her grandmother. 2 years ago, Daniel began, his voice strong but emotional, I was a different man. I thought I had everything. Money, power, success. I thought I'd built an empire that mattered. But I was wrong. I was empty. I'd forgotten what it meant to be human. He looked directly at Emma. And then a little girl reminded me. In the middle of my worst moment, when everyone was laughing at me, when I felt smaller than I'd ever felt, she saw past all of that. She didn't see my expensive suit or my fancy watch or my card getting declined. She just saw someone who needed help. And she helped. With everything she had. Tears were streaming down his face now, but he didn't try to hide them. That's what real wealth looks like. That's what real power is. The power to choose kindness when cruelty is easier. The power to give when you have little. The power to see someone's humanity when everyone else only sees their failure. The room was silent except for the sound of sniffling as people wiped their eyes. So this celebration isn't for me, Daniel continued. It's for Emma, who started all this without even meaning to. It's for every person who chooses kindness over cruelty, compassion over judgment, love over indifference. It's for everyone who proves, every single day, that we're better than we sometimes think we are. After he finished speaking, Emma ran up to him and hugged him tight. I'm proud of you, Mr. Daniel, she whispered, and those simple words meant more to him than any business deal ever had. Patricia came up too, putting her hand on Daniel's arm. My granddaughter gave you $4 that day, she said with a smile. Look what you did with it. Daniel laughed through his tears. Best investment I ever made. As the celebration continued around them, music playing, people talking and laughing and sharing food, Daniel looked around at what had been built. Not with steel and concrete this time, but with compassion and community. This was his real legacy. Not the buildings with his name on them, but the lives that had been touched, the families that had been helped, the hope that had been restored. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who'd been so humiliated when his card declined. That humiliation had been a gift, though he didn't know it at the time. It had stripped away his pride, his arrogance, his false sense of superiority. It had cracked him open just enough for Emma's kindness to get inside and plant something new. From that tiny seed of kindness, all of this had grown. And the beautiful thing, the thing that still amazed Daniel every single day, was that it kept growing. Every person helped went on to help others. Every act of kindness inspired more acts of kindness. Emma's gift hadn't just changed Daniel's life. It had started a ripple effect that was spreading farther than anyone could have imagined. As Daniel watched Emma laughing with other kids, her yellow shirt now replaced with new clothes but her heart unchanged, he understood something fundamental. We spend so much time teaching our children. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, if we're very open, they teach us instead. They remind us of the simple truths we've forgotten. That kindness matters. That we're all connected. That true wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with love. 3 crumpled dollars and some change. That's what it took to save a billionaire's soul. Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the biggest blessings. Sometimes a child's wisdom is deeper than all our adult knowledge. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is simple. See someone who's hurting and choose to help. That's what Emma did. And in doing so, she changed everything. The end.